strategy,
design,
marketing,
UX,
digital.
development.
This is Agencies That Build. This show is dedicated to leaders and teams that design and deploy in the digital world. My name is Jessie, and I'm a marketer and an agency owner.
And I'm Varun. I'm not a marketer, but a coder and an agency partner.
This show is sponsored by Together We Ship,
On a mission to help agencies grow.
All right, rock on. Here we are. Varun, my friend. I absolutely forgot to set up my mic. I'm not sure where it is in my office right now. So you're getting headphones today. Just realized. Are you ready for, I've been looking forward to this conversation. Are you ready for today's conversation?
I'm so excited to have our guest for today. Who do we have?
Today, he is a visionary leader driving human-centered design at the forefront of the company's mission with extensive experience in almost 3 decades in strategy, user experience, content, and service design. He not only cultivates new client relationships, but also guides projects personally. And we'll talk a little bit about that, actually quite a bit about that. A passionate advocate for teaching and coaching, he empowers individuals by harnessing the power of human-centered design. His knack for facilitation, team coordination, and captivating public speaking, making a sought-after conference speakers. Whoa, need some more coffee this morning. I'd like to welcome our guest, or this afternoon, whatever time of day it is, the president of NewCity, which is an interactive design agency, David Poteet. David, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jessie. I really appreciate it. It's a joy to be with you all today.
We're happy to have you. And I know we're both looking forward to this. So let's dive right in. Our myth busting question. What is some sort of bogus strategy, myth, misconception that you would like to set the record straight on?
Well, I think one of the things that we encounter a lot, we'll talk more about human-centered design and what that kind of means for us. It's been a really important part of our growth as a company. But a lot of times the organizations that we work with will invest heavily in brand strategy and kind of brand positioning and that sort of thing. And they miss out on how important the digital experience is in really shaping and impacting their brand. And that starts to do that well. It starts with human-centered design. But a lot of things that we've seen, as you mentioned, been doing this for a few years. And over the years, we've seen this evolution of how people have thought about the user, the people, the humans that we're creating these things for. And we've seen in that evolution, we've seen it kind of go from usability is just something that gets sprinkled on at the end of a project. Maybe it's sort of paid lip service to, if you have a more engineering forward operation, a lot of times there's just a lack of understanding or of people not having experienced how empowering it is to really to have your engineers see your users try to use their products, or in our world, thinking about higher education, what a difference it makes to watch a parent struggling to try to figure out how to pay their child's tuition at your university, and that kind of eye-opening moment where they realize that how easy it is to pay your tuition is part of the brand experience. And that's like down in the weeds, but also like as someone comes and they're trying to understand how they might be able to study music and continue their interest in music while also pursuing a degree in biomedical engineering. And what is that experience like for them as they start to engage with people in the department and people in different groups? And that, usually that part of the journey is not touching all the cool, flashy brand stuff that is done. So I think the myth that we want to bust is that these things exist like in separate compartments, almost, and really helping organizations see it all as a whole and see that whole user journey as the whole. If you're coming at it from a marketing standpoint, it's the whole brand experience, right? It's brand strategy. If you're coming at it from a engineering and development standpoint, it's about creating a sustainable, scalable, well-engineered, platform and experience that is going to, customer adoption is not going to be a problem because people are going to love using it. It's all of those things, kind of seeing them together. So we've just tried to bake that in right at the heart of everything that we do, instead of making it something that's kind of bolted on or an afterthought.
Part of your part of your process. I was going to say something deeper,
Yeah,
but you kind of
yeah,
already said it,
certainly. Yeah, it's a core skill set that we kind of expect. We have UX people on our team, but we expect everybody on the team to really kind of understand and value it.
Human-centered design. Let's dive into that as a topic, because I think it's something. I know as we were prepping for this, I mentioned I had seen it. I've seen it like a lot recently. Of course, I can't remember. It was probably my doom scrolling at 2 a.m. But
Yeah.
it was, talk to us a little bit about how do you, define that? Let's start with some basics there, so people, will level set how people are understanding what that means, and then maybe get into a little bit more from there. Can you give us how you guys define that?
A definition. I mean, it's approaching design from a place of trying to understand the context of the people that are going to be using it, and even the people that are going to be managing and building and providing the service. But the people that are going to be using it, what's their story, right? Where is this new solution that we're bringing into the world? Maybe maybe we're trying to make a better thing that we're building that's already exists, and we're trying to make a better version of that, or maybe it's something completely new. How does that fit into their story? What's their understanding, their mind, their sort of mental model as they approach it? But you can't, as soon as I start talking about that, well, everyone has their own story. And so you've got, all these unique stories. So part of the practice of human-centered design is learning how to conduct research in a way that you get enough insights from a cross-section of your user base that you can sort of triangulate on a solution that is going to be the optimal solution for the most people that you're serving. You can't design something specifically for, if I designed a solution that was just for Varun, then it might be great for him but not work for everybody else. So you're always trying to kind of balance that, but it's giving, you're not doing academic research necessarily when you're starting a human-centered design initiative. You're not going to be publishing papers on it, but you've got to get enough insight that you can go into the design process, and you're sketching and you're prototyping, you're doing all those things, but you're actually thinking about real people that you're creating for. And you're not just the default posture that most of us adopt if we haven't developed some of these skills, and everyone can develop these skills. These are not just for specialists. But the default posture that we tend to adopt is designing for myself. It's a reflexive design process. I think this is the tool I would use. This is the site I would use, how I would think of it. This is how I understand it. I imagine that other people probably think about it this way, what have you. And so the people that are naturally better at human-centered design are the people that have some direct interaction with a customer on a regular basis, right? They're watching, they're talking to, they're hearing from them. But a lot of times people in our organizations, and often it's the people who are building the software or writing, who are actually making the thing, don't have an opportunity to have that direct exposure. So a lot of human-centered design, here I'm channeling one of my gurus and friends is Jared Spool, who's one of the kind of original UX leaders. But he says the single most important thing is to get your team to actually get them closer to the user, get them to see what's happening, get them to actually, just watching a usability test and seeing a few people go through and work with the product, going out into the field, and you're designing a piece of software that someone's going to be using. Actually go into their office and see, or get on FaceTime and actually look what's on their desk, what's happening, what other distractions are happening around it. If your dog's running through your room while you're hosting a podcast,
Hasn't happened yet, but she probably will.
Exactly.
Well, it's interesting to hear, so my very, very, very early on in my career, I worked at Vistaprint when they were teeny tiny. It was about 150 people.
Yeah.
We did a lot of the printing out of the basement of the building. That tells you how early it was. And it was the first time, usability testing wasn't a thing they taught in school at that time. So I had never seen it before. I had never heard it before. And my role at the organization was to project manage what they called the content team. So it was the team building the templates. We were interacting with all the departments, and I knew the designers who designed the business card. You know what I mean? They had to put it on the product and all of that. And what was really interesting is we had a room where we would have users show us based off the website. And this is 20 years ago now.
Sure.
Yeah. but you could see them actually, and while it wasn't directly impactful on my role within the organization,
Yes.
I had to manage the team who it was. And so I was like, well, can I see that? Like, can I watch? And it was one of these, as you're describing it, I'm like, oh my God, that's what it was. That's what they were doing. That's,
Yeah,
we
exactly.
called it something different at the time, but it's what I'm curious to ask you about is from an agency perspective, how do, it makes sense, as a product leader within an organization, from a SaaS technology or whatever it is, you're talking to clients or customers and things like that. As an agency, how do you get in on that? How are you guys conducting? What does your process look like a little bit there? Can you like open up the wizard curtain?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, our process, so we are always working with some group of internal stakeholders who want to get better at understanding their users, their audiences, and they want their web presence or whatever the thing is we're making to be informed by, everyone loves the idea of human-centered design, but they don't necessarily know how to do it. So we end up coming along and being, involving them in the process and kind of coaching them, helping them to help demystifying it a little bit and just helping it teams. So we start with a stakeholder, engagement, and a lot of that is trying to suss out what they think they know about their customer. And we'll even do something, one of the exercises that we'll sometimes do is called ad hoc personas. So we will create personas that are based on what the leaders within the organization think they know about their customer. Some, like I said, if they're really heavily involved with their customer on a regular basis, they may have a pretty accurate sense of it. But we treat those as a hypothesis. So we're going to go out then and do research. And usually that research involves both some qualitative and quantitative research, but qualitative UX methods are things, I mean, the classic is some form of, call it contextual inquiry. I'm going to watch you doing the thing. I'm going to talk to you and interview you while you're doing the things that my product is relevant to, right?
Yeah.
So,
well,
and I
like
want as
notorious
much
in
as
food
possible.
stores, they have the camera watching people and where they shop, and they charge by shelf, that sort of
Right.
thing.
And of course, there's the sort of, there's the stealth version of that where you have people that are walking around and secretly observing, or you're using cameras and what have you. But we're doing it, usually on a Zoom session, or sometimes when we do service design, you're doing field studies, you're out on site, traveling around and and talking to people while they're in the middle of it. So that now you've got to do enough of those to get as I said, a kind of a cross section of customer experiences, and then we use a approach to analyzing that qualitative data. It's called grounded theory, if you want to look it up. But it basically, you're going through in your coding and pulling out insights, and you have a coding system that you're using to decide, not coding like programming, but coding as in tagging different observations that you make in the process. And you're pulling that data out and you're synthesizing it in some way, right? And so an important step for us is to, wherever we can, to involve our customers, the stakeholders, in the I describe it as chewing your own food, right? I mean, this is like, they don't learn if we just give them a fully digested report, right? We've done all the chewing, we've done all the thinking, and we hand them this thing, and it can become another bookshelf ornament. Back when people delivered printed reports, but if we give them something, if we involve them along the way, at least it's at some level they're starting to really see, and you start to hear them talk. It change you're starting to win when you hear the words coming out of their mouth. What we saw people doing, Robert had this problem, Juanita had this problem over here. It's like we saw these different settings, and so that there's lots of ways to synthesize that learning, because you can't just leave it in that raw research form. The next step for us is to usually to create some kind of a journey map, or an experience, like also called an experience map, or depending on the context, we might create a service blueprint, which is an expanded, or it's a kind of customer journey map, but it really reflects the the things that the humans who deliver a service experience are doing, and what technologies and systems are required behind the scenes to support that customer journey. So it helps you see, okay, here's what we want, here's what the customer's doing. And it can be a current state thing where like this just reflects what's happening today, or it can be a full, like, here's the vision of the future and what would it take for us to get there. So you can use that for like a gap analysis. But a lot of those forms of synthesizing the research into some sort of visualization and personas, like you could take those ad hoc personas I talked about and then create a new set of personas that sort of, say, okay, here's what we thought we knew, and here's what we learned, and now we've got a fully fleshed out research-based set of personas that can inform how we design. And then, how do you take that stuff and apply it to the design process? Well, that's, now you're really, because we've been talking about research, and that's the next piece of it. You ask about like what our process is. It's you have a lot of tools and approaches, but a design sprint is a great example. If you've heard of the 5-day design sprint or the design sprint model that Google Ventures pioneered, that's an example where you would come into a design sprint equipped with all that user insight that you'd gathered, and now we're gonna focus in on these 2 or 3 areas of kind of problem areas for the customer, and we're going to sketch, and we're going to prototype, and we're going to make something that works. And on Thursday we're testing, and Friday we're reviewing, so you can design design experiences for your team that get you working with that those user insights in a way to come up with new ideas, and involving, if you can and you want to involve customers in at least the testing process, but some organizations will even involve them in the design process. We've done that before as well. So
this is quite interesting. I mean, of course, the research is I think, the base behind human-centric design methodology, right? Mm-hmm. You need to start with that. And you explain in a very clean and easy manner for anybody to understand what goes behind, at least the way you project it. I'm curious to know, as an agency, like so 2 things actually. Has this approach always been the core or heart in your agency? Like this has been the standard method from day one, or has that evolved over time? And as it has evolved, or you lead with that, how did your team take it? Because it sounds like, so your focus is mostly in higher ed, right? As I understand correctly, you have been focusing in that market, right?
That's right.
So building applications or marketing websites, or what type of work have you focused on while using this approach? Or has that made any difference for you? Has it helped you in your positioning? I know there are a lot of questions that I just put into this, but I hope you understand where I'm going with this. I'm trying to understand how this process helped you with your positioning and giving that direction to the team to focus in this market.
Yeah, it's a great question. So it has been an evolution. We started, when I started NewCity in 1995, I didn't even know what human-centered design was. I was a designer. I had a degree in design. I had started out in engineering, so I kind of had about 3 years of an engineering degree, and then I decided I didn't really want to be an engineer. But I had that kind of engineering problem-solving sort of mindset, right? And in that second half of the 90s, the early days of the web, it was a really interesting time where there was a huge emphasis on doing stuff that was just cool and eye-catching and mind-blowing, and a lot of agencies were winning awards for doing stuff that you go to use these sites and you're like, this is amazing. You're like, what can I do? Where do I even go? So it wasn't always, there were lots of flash sites back in those days. And I mentioned Jared Spool before, but I actually went to a conference talk in 1999 in San Francisco that Jared gave called "Cool Doesn't Cut It," and it was about usability and understanding like website usability, and kind of bringing the some science back to the art, right? And think about how to really understand people. So that was a light bulb moment for me. As an agency, and I understand a lot of times, it helped that was the president and founder and was getting, interested in human-centered design as a differentiator for us and just the right way to do things. But a lot of times people get turned on to UX and they're not in that position where they can really influence the direction of the organization. But in our case, we started sending people, I started going to conferences, we started doing professional development, learning these methods, and it began there. But we were at a time where in the work that we were doing, we weren't really heavily into higher education in the first half of the 2000s. It was kind of the second half that we started to break more into higher ed. But our first big higher ed project was for Virginia Tech in 2006. It was my alma mater. And up until that point, we couldn't find any examples of a university that had actually used user research, market research, yes, but like true usability, user research as part of its web strategy, design process. Yeah. And so we proposed to Virginia Tech we were using a mental model approach to user research. I think I still have the book on my shelf that Indy Young, who's a fantastic UX leader, wrote this book years ago. There's we were featured in the end as one of our examples. It's from some of our work after Virginia Tech, but we said, hey, you're a research university. Wouldn't it be cool if we use some research to inform your strategy for your web presence? Right. And they loved that idea. But it was an uphill climb for a while, kind of persuading institutions to invest in research. You've probably heard this. If you've worked in digital for any length of time, people will say to you, you're the expert, you're supposed to know this stuff already. Right? And all the time. Yeah. So, that's the posture. Yeah, exactly. The whole posture with human-centered design is we don't know, we need to learn, right? I have to be curious and get to know your customer. So that
balancing that with your target audience too, as you're talking about human-centered design, not to completely interrupt, but it's like the struggle between who your buyer is versus who's actually the user of it. Yeah. It's like, and I just want to point that out as we're chatting through it, because we're really talking about the end user, who's not always the person giving you a credit card or that you're marketing to.
Exactly right.
And I think there's a differentiation from an agency perspective. To our advantage, we can ask that of our clients that says, okay, who are you actually buying versus who's using it? Varun may be, the owner and he's the one handing over the credit card, but let's say I'm the actual user in those cases. You're not marketing to me. You have to market to both of us in those cases.
That's been a big shift for us in our thinking in the last, say, 15 years, is exactly what you said, Jesse. But, well, at least from the standpoint of we're thinking, when we're talking human-centered design in the higher ed space, it's easy to just think, well, we're talking about students and families and alumni and research and stuff like that. But, my power just flickered. That's awesome.
Makes for an interesting episode.
Yeah. I've got my battery back up ready. We're going to keep rocking whatever happens. But what we started to realize, we would focus on the thing we're selling is the website. So we're thinking about the user as those audiences, and we're delivering you a finished website. Well, we've come to realize that's not actually that's not our product, and it's not our customer are the people who actually have to run and manage the presence for the university. So even though we're helping them design for their users, we're having to think more and more about our users, who are the people who are going to have to deal with the content management system, who are getting pressure from all these different directions. And content governance is a huge question in the higher ed space. Everyone saying, put this up on the website, we won't do this, do this initiative. And if you're not equipped with some ways to think about what should or shouldn't be on the website and how should it be organized, we needed to focus more on empowering those people, giving them the tools, but really giving them more playbook, how to approach these things. If we were ever going to have a hope that the websites we contribute to are going to, grow and improve over time and be sustainable and not just become a a place where entropy sets in on the second day. So that's been our journey, I think, in the last 10, 15 years. Varun, there was another part of your question that I don't think I quite got to, which is kind of like how our team, so maybe you can just rewind and ask me another question.
So I mean, as a leader, right, when we want to have an approach that this is what our agency is focused on. This is how we want to move forward. So you have certain thought process behind that. But when you want your team to follow that lead, right? So how did you structure that team together, which allowed you to have the same, everybody think alike, especially when you are, a full service, I assume you also do some engineering and dev as well. So at what point do they come in and how do they approach this type of design? Because your design team is doing the research and building the prototypes and wireframes and mocks in the first place, and then your engineering team comes. But all the thought process and design thinking that have been going through in the initial phases, how does that communicate to the engineering team to make sure that also they understand that too?
Yeah, so we've gotten to a much better place on that, but I think we've gotten there by failing at it a lot, early on. And I don't say failing, I mean, we successfully completed projects, but we were like a lot of firms, certainly in the 2000s, where it was more of a waterfall approach of the planners plan and the designers design and the developers develop. And they, you don't question what came before, right? There's a spec document that's delivered to you and and so, more and more you're kind of wringing the thinking, the strategy, the creativity out of the people that are downstream in that waterfall approach. So we, as part of our just kind of reflecting and talking to people about what they liked or didn't like about working at NewCity, along the way, we kind of recognized how much people wanted to have more of a seat at the table and kind of be involved in that process. And we've had such a culture of being builders. We've always felt like it's, because there's some agencies that do human-centered design or do the kind of stuff that we do that just do the strategy, right? They do the architecture and then it gets handed off to somebody else to build. And we've always found like any art or engineering or science, right? A lot of the innovation happens as you build. Right? You're figuring things out, you're realizing things that do or don't work, you're coming up with new ideas, and it continues to evolve so that the thing that you make at the end has very much been shaped by the development process. And so believing that, we started trying to figure out, how do we actually make that a reality in the way that we work together as a team? And so a lot of it has been just basically saying, we want to, I mean, it's not that our developers are doing as much planning work as our UX people, but they are at the table at the beginning. They're involved in the prototyping process. They're seeing the research too. We're getting their input in our sort of shaping and thinking about what we're going to make. There's a good feedback loop. Our process is not rigidly waterfall. It's not fully agile either. When we talk about more about that, I think we're going to get into that a little bit.
It's the next question, but
yes. But there's the flexibility that's built into it to keep kind of evolving, what we're making based on input from the whole team. So, I think we've tried to build a culture where our engineers feel just as valued and they've got as much of a voice in what we're making as our senior UX strategists do.
I think that's an important point and differentiation in terms of, part of what works for you guys with this, everybody having a seat at the table. I was going to ask the other question first, but I'm going to ask this one first, around how do you, for our listeners with having, it's just a lot of, how do you avoid a lot of cooks in the kitchen, I guess is what I'm trying to ask with your process. Like, how do you guys actually, between documentation and PMs and internal feedback loops and reviews, like, is there one thing or two things that you have found that, as strategists strategize and engineering implements, how do you get the cohesiveness between the two of them communicating before things go to the client?
Ooh, that's a really good question.
I'll vamp for
course-
another minute. I guess like, is there one or two tools that you have found, or are there one or two things that you found that just sucked? You know, like let's flip it the other
Yeah.
direction. And you guys are like, look, you know, we found that like online project management tools suck for us, and we really need to meet in person, and we need printouts, and everybody has to have them
Yeah.
stapled, you know, or that's what I'm looking for, is like, what's the nugget? Or what's the nugget that you're like, that's coal, I'm not touching that.
Well, one of we've designed some key junctures. We've designed experiences that the team has at key junctures in the project, where we bring people together intentionally to make sure everyone's fully engaged and is really picking things apart, questioning, thinking together. And you know, a design sprint is an example of something like that. We don't always do that for every project, but when it's appropriate, we do. But another one is that is called a component review, where we've got kind of wireframes, and you know, the front end design system is pretty well fleshed out. And rather than handing documentation to the developers and just saying like, here's the spec, go build this, we have a workshop and it's intense. We go through every piece of everything. We talk about what variation.
So there are printouts and there is a meeting.
Yeah, but it's all remote, of course. So it's all,
I'm joking.
Yeah,
kind of.
it's a virtual whiteboard, but it is basically, when we were in an office, we printed everything out and stuck it on the wall, and we talked through every little piece of it and figured out what, you know, the variations and what the implied functionality, because there's all this. I mean, Varun, I'm sure you're no stranger to implied functionality in a wireframe that the architect thinks it's obvious what this is supposed to do, and the engineer interprets it one way, and it was totally not what the architect had in mind. So, yeah, so we've gotten better. It's always about what kind of communication is effective in the moment and will then also lead to retention, and people will be able to come back and refer back to it. So we're doing things like that. We're doing a lot more to sort of glue together our whole, you know, we use Figma and Storybook for our pattern libraries, and then we use Drupal and WordPress as some of our tech stack elements. But we're gluing a lot of those pieces together so that there isn't such a divide between the tools our designers are using.
So one very, very simple tool that we have found that has started working really well for us internally is, and you know, I don't know if I haven't heard from other companies who would do that the way we do it, but at least I like it very, you know. So it's whenever we have to communicate the requirements, right? Sure, you can have the wireframes and Figma and put the documentation, but the thing that has really worked well for us is making use of the Loom video recording tool.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so people, you know, we started asking everybody, and everybody's like, it's such a simple thing. Just record yourself, explain what did you expect from this. Hear the thought process, right? Because that's what people want to hear. They don't want to know what you want them to do. They want to hear how is this requirement coming in the first place. So if you're creating a design, if this box needs to be here, why does it need to be here? What's the problem that you're trying to solve? And the best way to communicate is, especially after COVID, when everybody's not together, you know, it is super simple. Just record a video, record yourself, share the screen, and it doesn't take more than 5 minutes. And such a handy and quick way. People don't think of that way, you know. So I think Loom for us has really changed the way we communicate and work internally.
A great idea.
You know,
one of the things important about that example is there's always a story, right? There's always a story behind the thing, why this box is here and what it's supposed to do. And when we write specs, we often kind of remove the story. We just, here's exactly what you know, what it needs to do. But when you explain something, like in a video or you're in a meeting, you'll often, without thinking about it, you'll just you'll explain the story. Here's why we're doing this, and here's what happened and led to this, and it's like, oh, okay, that makes more sense now. Or wait a second, what we could solve this in a slightly different way. Would that be possible? And you're like, I never thought of that. That's a great idea, And that's what you want to be happening between designers and devs.
Well, it also changes your tone. So if you think about classic creative process, when you're writing, creative briefs coming back to design, and you're saying, hey, I want that to pop more. It's like the worst thing it's like, what does that even mean? Like, what do you mean pop more? It's easy to put that in a text or an email, but if you have to record a video and be like, look, I'm not really sure about this section here. I feel like something isn't working for me. I don't really know how to solve this. It allows you to express and communicate to your peers and colleagues in a way that doesn't feel like you need to make this pop more versus, hey, I don't know, like this isn't working. And I feel like it fosters the human centricity of the communication behind how you're working together internally.
Exactly.
So, because you can't hide behind an email, like, you're providing the verbal visual feedback. It's kind of why we do a video podcast version of this too. You can hear the tone, you can see people's voices and work through it.
I want to ask another question about not inspiring, but so you see how the technology, technologies are changing every day. Now, we as a leader, I think I ask this question to everybody, and I'm still trying to figure out myself, like, how do you find the balance between making sure your team is learning the new technologies, keeping up to the pace of what's happening in the world, but also being productive at the same time? Because you cannot, do you have a system in place? How do you help them find that balance where they're learning at the same time they are making best use of their time for the client's work? Because we are in the service business. How do we ensure that is happening?
Well, a part of it for us is just setting our expectations. We give our team members each get a week of professional development time that they're encouraged to spend every year, which is meant to be more like take a class. We can't afford for everybody to go to an in-person conference every year, but usually every 2 or 3 years are going to do some kind of in-person experience. But we want them to actually have some time that they can plan ahead, shut things off. And then we expect that part of their, when we look at our utilization goals for how much billable time somebody's going to do in a week, and then, internal team meeting time and other things like that, there's some padding in there for them to spend some time, tinkering with things. But I guess I don't know how intentional it has been, Varun. We've got a lot of tinkerers on the team, people that do like to try to figure out a better or faster way to do something, or figure out some, and so we've always encouraged some degree of experimentation even within kind of project time, so that we will decide, it's up to the project manager to decide how much of that time we end up billing to the client. If we don't feel like, if there's a bunch of time, you're going to be, you have to manage a budget. And if there's a bunch of time that we spent that, it was down a kind of a rabbit trail, and I can't really, that's not really focused on that client, so we're not going to bill it. We also build in a certain percentage in our financial model that we expect to have kind of write downs or on a project where some of that billable time we know is just not going to get captured. And so we try to allow for that to happen, and we recognize it and celebrate when people figure out new things. We have a guy on our team. He doesn't work for us full time anymore. He still works with us on contract, but he started out with us as a freelancer, and then while he was working for us, he worked with us full time for about a decade. He learned Drupal, right? And he didn't know Drupal at all when he came, and then he became a senior level Drupal engineer. And he just was always working on stuff behind the scenes, creating new Drupal modules and different things like that. And I can't tell you how many times we went looking for a solution for some problem in Drupal, and we find out that Andy's the maintainer of this module. So we're like, oh God, where does he find the time to do this? But yeah, so we just try to encourage. And we have folks that are involved as volunteers in in the higher education web community, and we try to make time for that too, because it's just good citizenship for us to be giving back. So when that R&D or when that some of those efforts can then be part of you just sort of generally contributing to the community, it's never hurt our business, I don't think. I mean, if anything, it demonstrates clients want, because I mean, I mean, this the way that we build websites or web applications, it's every 18 months, right? It's it's like it's new. If you're not putting that time in, then your runway is you're less than 2 years from being out of date. So you just have to keep spending.
Yeah, it's sorry, go ahead, Jesse.
No, you go. I was going to pivot. Give your thought.
I was just going to ask on following up on that response is, it's so important for us to make sure the team is learning and growing, because if they're not, they get stuck. Specifically, if we keep giving them the similar type of work every day, every night, they just feel bored. And that's one thing that I've found. I'm here. I would like to ask every agency owner who are in this B2B space, because technology is changing, but their clients are not expecting, any such thing. Like, they want you to, make sure you provide the best and the latest and greatest technology, right? So at the same time, you want to maintain your profitability, right? I mean, by having the team up to the speed. So it's kind of does both the job. If you give them some time, we in our company, we try to give them 20% of the time for their for their own learning that they can use, and then every month we group and just have everybody share what they learn, and then
a demo day kind of thing where you look at
exactly. So their personal project kind of thing, right, where they are just related to what they're in their field, but learn something new approach or something new, and how they're applying that to the clients' work. That really helps, and just share the knowledge among themselves.
Yeah, I think what you say is key. Where if you build something into your culture, into your what you measure and track, where you expect them to be spending that time, and it's encouraged and celebrated, that's key. However you do it, I think it's important.
I want to pivot for just a hot second, because this is an interesting talk around business methodology, and it's something that we talked a little bit about in our prep before this episode. But having chatted with so many agency owners, and there's we've even mentioned a couple here between Agile and a few others. How, I know you have a lot of strong opinions on some. How do you figure out what works for you, and how do you go about that, based off your experience and your growth here? Can you talk a little bit about that for a minute?
Yeah, I mean, we've had so many. So one of the challenges that you have as any business owner, if you're in this for any length of time, is that you will see all kinds of different models and approaches to doing the work. And we started out as a digital agency. We didn't even know what to call ourselves back then, but there was no template, right? There was no model. So we did just have to figure out how to do this kind of work. The model that a traditional advertising agency would use made no sense in our world. So we kind of threw out the playbook and just started figuring things out. And over time, that's evolved, and you see a lot of commonality across agencies now. But I've made the mistake. I don't know, it's a mistake. I hate to say it that way, but we have tried to import several different variations and methodologies and things. And obviously we've imported a lot of methods in human-centered design that have stuck and that we've used. We've always, had to figure out how to adapt and make them our own. But I think one of the most important lessons, Jesse, that I've been reflecting on this more just in the last, even the last few months, about there's a lot of great wisdom out there in the business community and in digital agencies or digital shops, and people have learned important lessons and they love to share it, and that's great. And some of them publish books, and some of them put on workshops and seminars and do coaching and teach you how to follow their methods. And there are, operating system models for running your business, EOS or Rhythm or Rockefeller Habits or different things. There's Agile versus, I talked about waterfall before, but there's different approaches to software development. And it's those things by themselves, they all of those ideas grew up in a context, right? They grew up in some kind of business, and somebody, maybe then they sort of, a coach took some of the ideas that they had some success with and they started teaching some other people to follow them, and they had some success, and then maybe they wrote a book, and started spreading more. And there's a lot of great stuff there, but you do have to really understand your own people, your own customers, your own kind of economic engine. I mean, I think ultimately it's Jim Collins when he talks about the Venn diagram of the three circles in Good to Great or Built to Last, one of his books, about what are you passionate about? What are you can you make money doing, and what are you the best in the world at, or what do you have the potential to be the best in the world at? And the overlap of those three circles is kind of your hedgehog concept, right? It's the idea. And
I like Ikigai. Yeah, I like Ikigai more than that. I mean, it's similar, but I think Ikigai enters one more factor. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
But you have to understand all those different dynamics. And I have made the mistake of importing a model into NewCity before without fully understanding those dynamics, thinking that I can tell stories, but when we were talking about the Agile question, we are not a software development shop, and we're not an in-house software development shop. I am very familiar with and have been through and have worked on Agile teams. I understand the rhythms, the methodologies, but what we do and the way that we work with our customers is a difficult fit for a fully Agile, everything we do is Agile kind of environment. But I know people that are super hardcore Agile evangelists and think that everything, if you're planning your wedding, it should be done with Agile. Or whatever the case is. We adopted a methodology, got some training, and tried to bring in a methodology around that, and went pretty far down the road with trying to kind of turn our company into like everything we did was going to run on an Agile rhythm. And we came to, there were some differences both in terms of how involved our clients are in the work process and how dependent we are on a close integration with our client teams. So we couldn't, there's a lot of variables we can't control about what's happening within a sprint, for example. With our clients, that made it, challenging. Some of the agencies that we'd observed that were doing really well with this model and making a lot of money, like really strong profit margins doing this approach, were actually they were doing much smaller projects than we were. And they were much more repeatable, like the same kind of almost templated, not a templated website, but a templated kind of solution approach. So they would take their clients through the same steps every time, to do these projects. And so they basically had like pre-planned roadmaps. And if you've done real Agile development, you don't roadmap, you don't write all the stories for everything you're doing 9 months from now, right? You have, it's a rolling, evolving thing, and you've got to have this flexibility about what the ultimate scope's going to be. And in our market, our clients are very particular about what scope they're going to get at the end of the process. And we have to sign a statement of work that says you're going to get these things, right? So, but it was just we learned a lot of stuff from that. Right. And there were valuable things that we pulled from it. But I think I've learned to take a minute, all right, give myself a beat to study and think, because man, you can end up, you can lose a year or two of good operation and profitability by, running headlong into a different methodology.
Oval peg into a round hole.
Yeah,
they look similar. Right. They're not quite working.
Exactly.
Well, this has been a great conversation. I have one last question for you. what's exciting you about the future?
Oh yeah, I'm looking forward to this question. Um, so we've been working with web, for a long time on the higher ed side of things, and we are building up in our practice expertise with some new members of our team, more around the service delivery experience on during the enrollment journey specifically. So we don't right now do much with the actual classroom experience, but but a lot of our web content's been focused on the prospective kind of external audience journey for a lot of the universities. So we're trying to bridge these two worlds of both what's happening in digital and what's happening in the real customer service experience, of bringing that expertise together and helping teams kind of bridge and create this in real life and digital kind of melding of strategy, so that the schools we work with are really delivering a more integrated, seamless, whatever words you want to use, holistic, experience for their students and families, that ultimately results in better engagement, better brand awareness. And that, for us as a digital agency, kind of moving out into the real world and trying to blur the lines between what we're doing in digital and what we're doing with folks in real life is super exciting. And it's service design, that's a whole nother topic, but that's it's an area that I can't wait to see how that starts to shape how we think about what we're doing in digital, and starting to create new solutions that don't just involve a website.
Well, thank you so much for your insights and your time today. This was a very interesting, you never know where it's going to go. And so we ended up in a couple spots. So, but this was great. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And so for those of you listening, where you can find David, and he's on LinkedIn, he's on the Twitter and the Instagram. And then your website is insidenewcity.com.
Yes.
So, and that's it. So that's it, everyone. If you learned something today or laughed, please tell somebody about the podcast. Thanks. Thanks for listening. Find our other episodes on agencies.build.com. Plus, we're listed anywhere you find your favorite podcasts.